Driving through the Mojave Desert was always a surreal experience, a vast expanse of nothingness stretching out under the endless sky. I had embarked on this journey for a business meeting in a small town, one of those places that barely made it onto the map, but held a surprising amount of potential clients. As the day began to fade, the sky transformed into a canvas of brilliant oranges and reds, a sight that never failed to captivate me. The road was deserted, as it often was at this time of day. The hum of my car's engine was the only sound accompanying the mesmerizing view. I was halfway through my journey when, without warning, my car began to sputter. The engine stuttered and then died, leaving me coasting to a halt on the side of the road. I checked my phone, hoping to call for assistance, but unsurprisingly, there was no signal. I was miles from the nearest town, stranded in the middle of nowhere with no one in sight. I decided to wait, hoping that another traveler might pass by. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature began to drop, and the desert took on a more ominous feel. I leaned against my car, watching as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. It was then that I noticed a peculiar light, much brighter than any star, hovering above the horizon. At first, I thought it was a plane, but it moved in a way that defied explanation, darting across the sky with incredible speed. My curiosity turned to unease as the light grew larger, descending rapidly towards me. I stood frozen, my mind racing to comprehend what I was witnessing. The light was now blinding, enveloping me in a glow that seemed to erase the world around me. "What's happening?" I muttered to myself, shielding my eyes with my arm. Before I could react further, everything went dark. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, plunging me into an abyss devoid of sound and sight. I was suspended in this void, a sensation of weightlessness overtaking me. Panic set in as I struggled to make sense of my surroundings, or lack thereof. I don't know how long I remained in that state. Time seemed to lose all meaning, stretching and compressing in a way that left me disoriented. My thoughts were a jumble of fear and confusion, punctuated by fleeting moments of clarity where I questioned my own sanity. Eventually, awareness began to seep back in. I felt solid ground beneath my feet, and the darkness lifted slightly, revealing a dim, unfamiliar environment. The air was cool, carrying a faint hum that resonated in my bones. I strained to see, to understand where I was, but the details eluded me. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. There was no response, only the persistent hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I took a tentative step forward, my senses on high alert, every instinct screaming at me to be cautious. As I moved, the darkness seemed to shift, hinting at shapes and forms just beyond my perception. The light returned, not as a blinding flash this time, but as a gentle glow that illuminated my surroundings. I found myself in a vast, white room, the walls curving seamlessly into the floor and ceiling. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a space devoid of corners or edges, giving it an unsettling, infinite quality. I wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms indistinct and shrouded in a haze that made it impossible to discern any features. They moved with a fluid grace, surrounding me with an air of quiet observation. I felt their presence more than saw them, an intangible awareness that pressed against my mind. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to remain calm. The figures did not respond verbally, but I sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change that suggested communication beyond words. It was as if they were probing my thoughts, sifting through my memories with an ethereal touch. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that transcended physical boundaries. Despite the surreal nature of the encounter, there was no malice in their actions. I sensed a curiosity, a desire to understand rather than harm. Yet the lack of control over my own mind was disconcerting, an invasion that left me feeling powerless. As the minutes, or perhaps hours, ticked by, the figures continued their silent examination. I was acutely aware of every sensation, every shift in the air, as if my senses had been heightened to an unnatural degree. The room itself seemed to pulse with energy, a living entity that enveloped us all. Eventually, the probing ceased. The figures receded, melting back into the shadows as the light dimmed once more. I was left alone in the vast whiteness, my mind reeling from the experience. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on me with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the encounter ended. The light flared once more, and I was plunged back into darkness. The sensation of weightlessness returned, a brief moment of disorientation before gravity reasserted itself. I was back in the desert, the familiar chill of the night air biting into my skin. The stars twinkled overhead, indifferent to my plight. My car sat idly by the roadside, its engine humming softly, as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process the impossible. Had it been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress? Or had I truly experienced something beyond the realm of human understanding? As I climbed back into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had irrevocably changed. The desert, once a place of solitude and beauty, now held a mystery that defied explanation. And I was left with more questions than answers, a lone witness to an encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my days. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a place that defied all logic and understanding. The last memory I had was of the overwhelming light in the desert, and now I was in a room that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of reality. The walls were a pristine white, curving smoothly into the floor and ceiling, giving the space an otherworldly, seamless appearance. There were no windows, no doors, and no discernible source of light, yet the room was brightly lit. I was lying on a table, or at least what felt like a table, though it appeared to be made of the same material as the room itself, smooth, cool, and unyielding. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if gravity had intensified. Panic threatened to overtake me as I struggled to comprehend my situation. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and echoing strangely in the vastness of the room. There was no immediate response, only the soft hum that seemed to permeate the very air around me. It was a sound that resonated deep within, more felt than heard, a constant presence that was both comforting and unsettling. As I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, I became aware of figures moving around me. They appeared as shadows at the edge of my vision, indistinct and elusive. My eyes struggled to focus on them, but they remained frustratingly out of reach, like trying to grasp a wisp of smoke. "Who are you? What do you want?" I asked, my voice a mixture of fear and defiance. The figures did not respond in words, but I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change that suggested they were communicating in a way I couldn't perceive. It was as if they were speaking directly to my mind, bypassing the need for spoken language. The sensation was both intrusive and oddly calming, a paradox that left me feeling exposed yet strangely at peace. Memories began to surface, not in a linear fashion, but as a series of disjointed images and sensations. I saw flashes of my childhood, moments of joy and sorrow, all interwoven with the present. It was as if the figures were sifting through my life, piecing together a puzzle that only they could see. The experience was disorienting, a kaleidoscope of emotions and memories that left me feeling vulnerable and exposed. Yet there was no pain, only a gentle probing that seemed to respect the boundaries of my mind. I sensed a curiosity, a desire to understand rather than to harm. As time passed, though how much time, I couldn't say, I began to notice a pattern in the figures' movements. They circled around me with a fluid grace, their forms shifting and changing like shadows cast by a flickering flame. I couldn't discern any features, only the sense of presence, an awareness that pressed against my consciousness. "Please, I don't understand," I pleaded, hoping for some form of acknowledgement, a sign that I wasn't alone in this surreal experience. Again, there was no verbal response, but I felt a warmth spreading through my mind, an assurance that I was safe. It was a sensation that defied explanation, a comfort that seemed to come from within rather than from any external source. Gradually, the probing ceased. The figures retreated, leaving me alone in the vast whiteness. The silence was profound, a heavy blanket that wrapped around me, muting all sounds save for the persistent hum. I lay there, trying to process the experience, to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a dream? A hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? Yet it felt so real, so vivid, that I couldn't dismiss it as mere fantasy. As I pondered these questions, I felt a shift in the air. The room seemed to pulse with energy, a living entity that responded to my presence. The light dimmed, and I was once again enveloped in darkness. The sensation of weightlessness returned, a brief moment of disorientation before I felt solid ground beneath me once more. I was back in the desert, the familiar chill of the night air biting into my skin. The stars twinkled overhead, indifferent to my plight, and the hum of my car's engine filled the silence. I stood there for a long moment, trying to reconcile the impossible with the reality I had known. Had I truly experienced something beyond the realm of human understanding, or was my mind playing tricks on me? As I climbed back into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every move. The desert, once a place of solitude and beauty, now held a mystery that defied explanation, and I was left with more questions than answers, a lone witness to an encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my days. The drive back to civilization was a blur, my mind replaying the events over and over, searching for meaning in the madness. I arrived home in the early hours of the morning, exhausted and no closer to understanding what had happened. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my normal life, but the experience lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. I found myself questioning everything I had once taken for granted, wondering if there was more to the world than what I could see and touch. Despite my efforts to move on, the encounter remained at the forefront of my thoughts, a puzzle with missing pieces that taunted me with its incompleteness. I knew that I had been changed, that I could never go back to the way things were before. And so, I waited, hoping for answers that might never come, haunted by the memory of that inexplicable experience in the desert. The return to consciousness was as sudden as the plunge into darkness had been. I found myself standing in the middle of the Mojave Desert once again, the chill of the night air a stark contrast to the warmth I had felt moments, or perhaps hours, earlier. The stars twinkled overhead, indifferent to my plight, as if the universe itself was unaware of the strange journey I had just undertaken. My car was there, parked on the side of the road where I had left it, the engine purring softly as if it had never stalled in the first place. The dashboard clock glowed in the darkness, displaying a time that made no sense. According to it, 4 days had passed since I had last been aware of my surroundings. I blinked, trying to reconcile the impossible with the reality I had once known. 4 days, I whispered to myself, the words sounding hollow in the vast emptiness of the desert night. How could I have lost 4 entire days? The thought was both terrifying and surreal, a puzzle that my mind refused to piece together. I climbed back into the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The familiar feel of the leather beneath my fingers was a small comfort in the face of such uncertainty. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a sound that was both reassuring and unsettling in its normalcy. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the endless expanse of sand and scrub. I drove on autopilot, my mind a whirl of confusion and disbelief. The headlights carved a path through the darkness, illuminating the way back to civilization, but my thoughts remained trapped in the strange encounter I had just experienced. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I reached the outskirts of the nearest town. It was a small, dusty place, the kind where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were a rare sight. I parked on the main street, my mind still reeling from the events of the past few days. I needed to talk to someone, to make sense of what had happened. But who would believe such an outrageous story? I felt like a character in a science fiction novel, caught up in a plot that defied all logic and reason. I decided to start with the local diner, a small establishment that served as the heart of the town. As I entered, the bell above the door jingled, announcing my arrival. The few patrons inside glanced up, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. I took a seat at the counter, the familiarity of the setting a stark contrast to the surreal experience I had just endured. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a weary smile, approached with a pot of coffee. "What can I get you, Han?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. "Just coffee, thanks," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She poured a steaming cup and set it in front of me, her gaze lingering for a moment as if sensing my unease. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Something like that," I admitted, taking a sip of the bitter brew. As I sat there, nursing my coffee and trying to gather my thoughts, I overheard snippets of conversation from the other patrons. They spoke of mundane things, weather, crops, local gossip, each word grounding me further in the reality I had once known. Eventually, I worked up the courage to speak. "Has anyone seen anything strange around here lately?" I asked, my voice hesitant. The waitress paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Strange? Like what?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I don't know. Maybe lights in the sky. Or anything unusual." She considered this for a moment before shaking her head. "Not that I've heard of. This place is pretty quiet. Not much happens around here." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Of course, no one would have noticed anything. The desert was vast and empty, a place where secrets could easily be lost. I finished my coffee and paid the bill, leaving the diner with more questions than answers. My story seemed too fantastical to share, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had happened to me. Over the next few days, I tried to reach out to friends and family, hoping for some validation, some confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. But each attempt was met with skepticism, disbelief, and in some cases, outright ridicule. "Come on, Jake," my brother Tom said over the phone, his voice filled with incredulity. "You expect me to believe you were abducted by aliens? You've been watching too many movies." "But it happened," I insisted, frustration creeping into my voice. "I can't explain it, but I know what I saw." "Maybe you just fell asleep in the car and dreamed the whole thing," he suggested, trying to offer a rational explanation. I sighed, knowing it was futile. Without evidence, without something tangible to prove my experience, my story was just that, a story, easily dismissed by those who hadn't lived it. Even my closest friends, those who knew me best, struggled to accept my account. "Jake, we've known each other for years," my friend Emily said, her tone gentle but firm. "You're not the type to make things up, but it's a lot to take in." "I know," I replied, my voice tinged with desperation. "I don't expect you to understand, but I just need someone to believe me." She hesitated, her silence speaking volumes. I really do. But it's just so unbelievable." As the days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly isolated, trapped in a world that refused to acknowledge the impossible. My story had become a burden, a secret that I carried alone, with no one to share the weight. I began to doubt my own sanity, questioning whether the experience had been real or a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen something beyond comprehension, something that had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. The desert, once a place of solitude and beauty, now held a mystery that defied explanation. And I was left with more questions than answers, a lone witness to an encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my days. For days had passed since my return from the desert, and the experience continued to haunt me. I found myself replaying every moment, every sensation, trying to find some logical explanation for what had happened. Yet, the more I thought about it, the more elusive the truth became. I was trapped in a cycle of doubt and disbelief, unable to reconcile the impossible with the world I knew. It was on the morning of the 5th day that everything changed. I was sitting in my living room, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, when there was a knock at the door. The sound was unexpected, a sharp intrusion into the silence of my home. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities. Who could it be at this hour? Setting the cup down, I made my way to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I opened it, I was greeted by the sight of two men standing on my porch. They were dressed in dark suits, their expressions serious and unreadable. There was an air of authority about them, a presence that commanded attention. "Mr. Jake Thompson," one of them asked, his voice calm and measured. "Yes, that's me," I replied, trying to mask my anxiety with politeness. "Can I help you?" The man nodded, producing a badge from his pocket. "I'm Agent Smith, and this is Agent Johnson. We're with NASA. May we come in?" "NASA?" The name sent a jolt of surprise through me. What could they possibly want with me? I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "Of course, please come in." They followed me into the living room, their eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced ease. I motioned for them to sit, taking a seat opposite them, my mind racing with questions. "What brings NASA to my doorstep?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light despite the tension in the air. Agent Smith leaned forward, his expression serious. "We're here because of an incident that occurred in the Mojave Desert a few days ago. Our instruments detected an unusual phenomenon in the area, and your name came up in our investigation." My heart skipped a beat. They knew. Somehow, they knew about my encounter. "What kind of phenomenon?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Agent Johnson spoke up, his tone matter-of-fact. "We detected an anomaly, a fluctuation in the electromagnetic field that coincided with your reported experience. It's not something we see often, and it piqued our interest." I nodded, my mind racing. Finally, someone believed me, or at least they were taking me seriously. "I don't know what happened out there," I admitted, "but it was unlike anything I've ever experienced." The agents exchanged a glance, a silent communication that spoke of shared understanding. "That's why we're here," Agent Smith said. "We'd like to ask you some questions about what you saw, what you felt. Anything you can remember could be valuable." I hesitated, a mix of relief and apprehension flooding through me. On one hand, I was grateful for the opportunity to share my story with someone who might understand. On the other, the involvement of NASA suggested a level of complexity that I wasn't sure I was prepared to face. "Of course," I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything I can remember." For the next hour, I recounted my experience in the desert, the strange lights, the inexplicable loss of time. The agents listened intently, their expressions revealing little, but their questions were probing and precise, designed to extract every detail I could provide. "Did you notice any changes in your surroundings before the lights appeared?" Agent Johnson asked, his pen poised over a notepad. I thought back, trying to recall any anomalies. "The engine started to sputter, and then died completely," I said. "But other than that, nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the lights appeared." Agent Smith nodded, jotting down notes. "And you mentioned a sensation of weightlessness. Can you describe it in more detail?" I closed my eyes, trying to recapture the feeling. It was like floating, but without any sense of direction. I couldn't tell which way was up or down. It was disorienting, but not unpleasant. The questions continued, each one delving deeper into my memories, pulling at threads I hadn't even realized were there. As I spoke, I felt a sense of validation, a confirmation that my experience was real, that I wasn't alone in my confusion. Finally, the agents seemed satisfied, their notebooks filled with my account. Agent Smith leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Thompson. Your information is invaluable to our investigation." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Do you think you'll be able to figure out what happened?" Agent Johnson offered a small, reassuring smile. "We're doing everything we can. The phenomenon you experienced is rare, but not unprecedented. With your help, we might be able to learn more." As they rose to leave, I couldn't help but ask the question that had been burning in my mind. Why is NASA involved in this? It seems beyond your usual scope. Agent Smith paused at the door, considering his response. "Let's just say that phenomena like these sometimes intersect with our interests. It's important that we understand them, for all our sakes." With that, they left, leaving me standing in the doorway, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Their visit had answered some questions, but it had also raised many more. What was the anomaly they had detected? And what did it mean for me? And for the world? The encounter with NASA had given me a glimmer of hope, a sense that I wasn't completely alone in this strange journey. But it also left me with a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that I was now part of something much larger than myself. As I closed the door, I realized that my life had taken a turn I could never have anticipated. The world was no longer as simple as it once seemed, and I was left to navigate the complexities of a reality that defied understanding. The days following the visit from the NASA agents were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had been irrevocably changed, that I was now part of a larger, more mysterious narrative. The agents had promised to stay in touch, but as the days turned into a week, I heard nothing further. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and doubts, each one more unsettling than the last. It was on the 8th day that the call came. I was sitting in my living room, staring blankly at the television, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mr. Thompson," the voice on the other end said. It was Agent Smith. "Yes, this is Jake," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'd like you to come to a facility for further examination," he said. "It's important for our investigation, and we believe it will also help you understand what happened." I hesitated, the idea of being examined by NASA both thrilling and terrifying. "Where is this facility?" I asked. "We'll send a car to pick you up," Agent Smith replied. "It will be easier that way." I agreed, and within an hour, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. The driver, a stern-looking man in a dark suit, nodded to me as I climbed into the back seat. The drive was silent, the tension palpable as we left the familiar streets of my town and headed towards an unknown destination. The facility was located on the outskirts of a larger city, a nondescript building surrounded by high fences and security cameras. As we approached, the gates opened, and we drove inside. The driver escorted me to the entrance, where Agent Johnson was waiting. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. "We appreciate your cooperation." I nodded, my nerves frayed but my curiosity piqued. "What exactly are we doing here?" "We need to conduct a series of tests," Agent Johnson explained. "Medical, psychological, and a few others that will help us understand your experience better." I followed him through a series of corridors, each one pristine and sterile, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. We arrived at a small room, where a team of doctors and scientists were waiting. They greeted me with polite nods, their expressions a mix of curiosity and professionalism. The next few hours were a whirlwind of tests and examinations. Blood samples were taken, brain scans conducted, and a battery of psychological assessments administered. The doctors were thorough, their questions probing and precise, designed to extract every detail of my experience. "Can you describe the sensations you felt during the encounter?" one of the doctors asked, his pen poised over a clipboard. I took a deep breath, trying to recall the details. It was like floating, but without any sense of direction. There was no pain, just a feeling of weightlessness and disorientation. The doctor nodded, jotting down notes. "And the figures you saw, can you describe them in more detail?" I closed my eyes, trying to picture the shadowy forms. They were indistinct, like shadows. I couldn't make out any features, but I felt their presence. It was like they were communicating with me, but not with words. The questions continued, each one delving deeper into my memories, pulling at threads I hadn't even realized were there. As I spoke, I felt a sense of validation, a confirmation that my experience was real, that I wasn't alone in my confusion. After the medical examinations, I was taken to a different room for the psychological assessments. A woman introduced herself as Dr. Emily Carter, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma and anomalous experiences. "Jake, I'm here to help you process what you've been through," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "This kind of experience can be very disorienting, and it's important to understand how it's affecting you." I nodded, grateful for her empathy. "It's been hard," I admitted. "No one believes me. They think I'm crazy." Dr. Carter smiled gently. "It's not uncommon for people to react that way, but you're not alone. We're here to help." The psychological assessments were intense, exploring every aspect of my mental and emotional state. Dr. Carter asked about my childhood, my relationships, my fears and hopes. It was both exhausting and cathartic, a deep dive into the core of my being. As the hours passed, I began to feel a strange sense of relief. For the first time since the encounter, I was able to talk openly about my experience, without fear of judgment. The team at the facility treated me with respect and professionalism, their questions designed to understand rather than to dismiss. Finally, the examinations were over. Agent Johnson escorted me to a small lounge, where I was given a meal and a chance to rest. As I sat there, eating in silence, I couldn't help but wonder what they had found. Had the tests revealed anything? Did they have any answers? After what felt like an eternity, Agent Smith joined me in the lounge. He took a seat across from me, his expression serious, but not unfriendly. "Jake, thank you for your patience," he said. "We have some preliminary results from the tests, and we'd like to share them with you." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "What did you find?" Agent Smith took a deep breath. "The medical tests showed some unusual markers in your blood, things we don't typically see. It's not harmful, but it's definitely out of the ordinary." I frowned, trying to process this information. "What does that mean?" "We're not entirely sure yet," he admitted, "but it suggests that something significant happened to you. The psychological assessments also indicate that your experience was genuine, not a product of stress or hallucination." A mix of relief and confusion washed over me. "So, you believe me?" "We do," Agent Smith said, "and we're committed to finding out what happened. This is uncharted territory for all of us. But with your help, we might be able to learn more." As I left the facility, I felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time since the encounter, I wasn't alone in my quest for answers. The team at NASA was taking my experience seriously, and together, we might be able to unravel the mystery of what had happened in the desert. But with that hope came a new sense of responsibility. I was now part of something much larger than myself, a journey into the unknown that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. The days following my visit to the NASA facility were filled with a strange mixture of normalcy and underlying tension. On the surface, life went on as usual. I went to work, interacted with friends and family, and tried to maintain a semblance of routine. But beneath that facade, I was acutely aware that my life had veered into uncharted territory. NASA's interest in my experience provided a sense of validation, but it also raised countless questions. What had they found in my blood? What did the psychological assessments reveal about my state of mind? And most importantly, what was the nature of the anomaly that had drawn their attention in the first place? I was in a constant state of anticipation, waiting for the next call, the next piece of the puzzle. It came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. The number was once again unfamiliar, but I answered it without hesitation. "Mr. Thompson, this is Agent Smith. We have some new information and would like to discuss it with you. Can you come to the facility tomorrow?" "Of course," I replied, my heart racing. "I'll be there." The next morning, I made the now familiar journey to the NASA facility. Agent Smith and Agent Johnson were waiting for me, their expressions serious, but not unfriendly. They led me to a conference room, where a series of documents and computer screens were laid out. "We've been analyzing the data from your tests," Agent Smith began, "and we've uncovered some intriguing findings." He gestured to one of the screens, which displayed a series of graphs and charts. "These are the results of your blood tests. As we mentioned before, there are some unusual markers, proteins and enzymes that are not typically found in human blood." I leaned in, trying to make sense of the complex data. "What does that mean?" "We're not entirely sure yet," Agent Johnson admitted, "but it suggests that you were exposed to something, or someone unlike anything we've encountered before." Agent Smith continued, "We've also been reviewing the electromagnetic data from the night of your encounter. The anomaly we detected was unlike any natural phenomenon we've ever recorded. It was as if the fabric of space-time itself was distorted." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you saying that what I experienced was extraterrestrial?" Agent Smith hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We can't say for certain, but the evidence points to something beyond our current understanding of physics and biology." The room fell silent as I absorbed this information. The idea that I had encountered something not of this earth was both thrilling and terrifying. It confirmed my deepest fears and my wildest hopes. "What about the figures I saw?" I asked. "The shadows, were they?" "We don't know," Agent Johnson said. "But your descriptions match other accounts we've encountered. There have been reports of similar experiences, with shadowy figures and sensations of weightlessness." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Other accounts? You mean this has happened before?" Agent Smith nodded. "Yes, there have been other cases. They're rare, but they share enough similarities to suggest a pattern. We believe that these encounters are connected, and that there's a larger phenomenon at work." As he spoke, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I wasn't alone in my experience, but that also meant that the mystery was even more profound than I had imagined. "We'd like to show you something," Agent Johnson said, leading me to another room. Inside, there were several large filing cabinets and a table covered in documents. "These are reports from other cases. We think you might find them interesting." I spent the next few hours poring over the files, each one detailing an encounter similar to mine. There were accounts from all over the world, spanning decades. Some were eerily similar: bright lights, loss of time, shadowy figures, while others had unique elements that added to the overall mystery. One report, in particular, caught my attention. It described an encounter in the Australian outback, where a man had experienced a similar loss of time and described the same floating sensation. He, too, had been found with unusual markers in his blood, and his psychological assessments mirrored my own. As I read through the files, a picture began to emerge. These encounters were not random. They were part of a larger pattern, a phenomenon that defied conventional explanation. The implications were staggering, suggesting that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that we were being observed, perhaps even studied, by an intelligence far beyond our own. "Why haven't I heard about these cases before?" I asked, looking up from the documents. "Most of them have been kept out of the public eye," Agent Smith explained. "The information is highly classified, and the individuals involved were often reluctant to come forward. But with your help, we're hoping to piece together a clearer picture." I nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility weigh on my shoulders. My experience was part of a larger mystery, one that could have profound implications for humanity. I was determined to do whatever I could to help unravel it. As the day drew to a close, Agent Smith and Agent Johnson escorted me back to the entrance. "Thank you for your cooperation, Jake," Agent Smith said. "We'll be in touch with any new developments." I left the facility with a renewed sense of purpose. The mystery was far from solved, but I was no longer alone in my quest for answers. NASA's involvement had given me a sense of legitimacy, and the knowledge that others had experienced similar encounters provided a strange comfort. But with that comfort came a new sense of urgency. The phenomenon was real, and it was happening to others. What did it mean for humanity? Were we being watched, studied, and most importantly, what was the purpose behind these encounters? As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. The world was no longer as simple as it once seemed, and I was left to navigate the complexities of a reality that defied understanding. The mystery had deepened, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Weeks turned into months, and my life continued to be a delicate balance between the mundane and the extraordinary. On the surface, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the undercurrent of my encounter and the subsequent involvement with NASA was never far from my mind. The mystery of what had happened to me in the desert had become an all-consuming obsession, one that I could not escape even in my quietest moments. The team at NASA remained in contact, providing updates and requesting further information as their investigation progressed. Each interaction reinforced the reality of my experience and the gravity of the situation. The anomaly in the Mojave Desert was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, more complex phenomenon that defied conventional understanding. One evening, as I was settling in for the night, my phone rang. The number was familiar now, Agent Smith. I answered, my heart already pounding in anticipation. "Jake, we need to meet," he said, without preamble. "There's something important we need to discuss. Can you come to the facility tomorrow?" "Of course," I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. I'll be there. The next morning, I made my way to the NASA facility once again. The drive had become routine, but the sense of unease and anticipation never diminished. As I entered the building, Agent Smith and Agent Johnson were waiting for me, their expressions more serious than usual. "Jake, thank you for coming," Agent Smith said, leading me to a conference room. "We have some significant developments to share with you." I took a seat, my nerves on edge. "What is it?" Agent Johnson handed me a folder, his face etched with concern. "We've made some breakthroughs in our analysis of the data from your encounter. There are things we need to discuss, and decisions that need to be made." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the documents inside. There were detailed reports, graphs, and images, evidence of the anomaly and its effects. But what caught my attention most was a series of photographs, each one showing a different person in various locations around the world. They all had one thing in common: the same shadowy figures I had seen in the desert. "These are other individuals who have experienced similar encounters," Agent Smith explained. "We've been able to identify and contact some of them, and their accounts align closely with yours." I looked up, my mind reeling. "So, it's not just me. This is happening to others too." "Yes," Agent Johnson confirmed. "And we've discovered that these encounters are not random. There's a pattern, a purpose behind them. We believe that these entities, whatever they are studying us, possibly even trying to communicate." The weight of their words settled heavily on my shoulders. The implications were staggering, and the responsibility overwhelming. "What does this mean for us? For humanity?" Agent Smith leaned forward, his expression grave. "It means that we need to prepare. We don't know what their intentions are, but we can't ignore the possibility that they could pose a threat. At the same time, this could be an opportunity for unprecedented advancements in our understanding of the universe." I nodded, trying to process the enormity of the situation. "So, what do we do now?" Agent Johnson took a deep breath. "This is where you come in, Jake. We need your help. Your experience is crucial to our understanding of these encounters, and we believe that you can play a key role in our efforts to communicate with these entities." I felt a surge of both pride and fear. The idea of being at the forefront of such a monumental discovery was exhilarating, but the risks were undeniable. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We want you to join our team," Agent Smith said. "Work with us to analyze the data, develop strategies for communication, and prepare for any potential threats. This is a highly classified operation, and your involvement would be invaluable." The decision weighed heavily on me. On one hand, I felt a deep sense of duty to contribute to this groundbreaking effort. On the other, the thought of diving deeper into the unknown was daunting. What about my life here? My job, my family? "We understand the sacrifices involved," Agent Johnson said gently. "But this is a unique opportunity, one that could change the course of history. We will provide support and resources to help you transition, and your identity will be protected." I sat in silence, the enormity of the decision pressing down on me. The encounter in the desert had already upended my life, and now I was being asked to commit to a path that would take me even further into the unknown. After a long moment, I looked up at the agents, my resolve firm. "I'll do it. I'll join your team." Agent Smith smiled, a rare expression of warmth. "Thank you, Jake. We knew we could count on you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. I resigned from my job, explaining to my bewildered boss that I had been offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I made arrangements with my family and friends, providing vague explanations that left them with more questions than answers. The secrecy was necessary, but it was difficult to keep such a monumental part of my life hidden. NASA provided me with a new identity and a secure living arrangement near the facility. I was given access to classified information and introduced to a team of experts in various fields: scientists, engineers, linguists, and psychologists, all working together to unravel the mystery of the encounters. As I settled into my new role, I felt a sense of purpose and belonging that I hadn't experienced since the encounter. The work was challenging and often frustrating, but it was also exhilarating. We were on the front lines of a discovery that could redefine humanity's place in the universe. One evening, As I was reviewing data in my apartment, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Agent Smith standing there, a serious expression on his face. "Jake, we need to talk," he said. "There's been a development." I invited him in, my heart pounding with anticipation. "What is it?" "We've received a signal," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "It's unlike anything we've seen before. We believe it's an attempt at communication." The words sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. "A signal? From them?" "Yes," Agent Smith confirmed. "And we need your help to decipher it. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." As we made our way to the facility, my mind raced with possibilities. The signal was a glimmer of hope, a chance to bridge the gap between our world and theirs. It was the culmination of months of work, and the beginning of a new chapter in our understanding of the universe. The room was abuzz with activity as we entered. The team gathered around a series of monitors, displaying the signal. It was a complex pattern of sounds and symbols, unlike anything we had encountered before. "Jake, take a look at this," one of the scientists said, pointing to the screen. "We believe it's a form of language, but we need your input to decode it." I stared at the screen, my mind racing to make sense of the patterns. It was a daunting task, but I felt a surge of determination. This was what I had been preparing for, the moment that could change everything. As I worked with the team to analyze the signal, I felt a sense of awe and wonder. We were on the brink of a discovery that could redefine our understanding of the universe and our place within it. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had led us to this moment, a moment of connection, of possibility, and of hope. The mystery of the encounter in the desert had brought me to this point, and I knew that the journey was far from over. There were still countless questions to be answered and challenges to be faced. But with each step, we were moving closer to understanding the truth and to forging a new path for humanity.